Today we've got an experiment. We need to see how to make this wool felt and all these beautiful colors shrink as little as possible when we are stitching with our stick and stitch stickers. So let's test it out and see how we can use wool felt or wool blended felt in water. Crazy, I know, right? But don't worry, we're gonna demystify it, so be sure to stay around until the end. Today, we have an experiment. I need to see how much this brand new wool felt is gonna shrink in water. Why? Because I have an embroidery workshop coming up where we're making bookmarks using water-soluble paper, and I need to see how much these bookmarks are gonna shrink. I need to make sure that this project is as easy as possible for my students who are attending the workshop, which means I'm gonna take the guesswork out before we even start. So I am testing 2 different water-soluble patches. They're actually the same patch, but on 2 different pieces of wool. This wool has been pre-shrunk. Oh, yeah, hey, by the way, if you've never worked with wool felt, this is 10 to 15% merino wool, I believe. I'll double check that. I'll put the little stat right here. 10 to 15% merino wool, and then the rest is rayon. So is this, but this one I pre-shrunk. I put it into slightly warm water and I let it shrink. It shrank down about 5%. And this one I have not pre-shrunk at all. So we're gonna see what happens when we do water-soluble embroidery on these bookmarks and then set them into cold water. I wanna see if they both shrink in cold water, if this one shrinks less since it was pre-shrunk. I wanna see exactly what's going to happen because I want there to be absolutely no guesswork for my students who are attending this workshop. If I can minimize the shrinking, that is the goal. And the benefits for you are that if you ever have to work with partial wool felt, that hopefully these results will help you determine how much your project is gonna shrink if you need to put it in water. Now, do I need to make a bookmark that's going to be submerged in water? No, but it's much easier to stitch when you have a pattern and a design. Freeform stitching, which is what I do a lot when I'm making my felt bookmarks, it's really for experienced stitchers. My workshops are beginner friendly, so we wanna make sure they have lines, easy lines to follow when they're working on their projects. And felt is kind of hard to draw on, so I could be using, pens or marking tools, but it's gonna be bumpy. It's not gonna give us nice clean lines the same way that water-soluble paper does. I'm a huge fan of water-soluble paper. So I'm going to stitch up both of these bookmarks. We are gonna submerge them in cold water to dissolve the sticker, and then we're gonna see the shrinkage results. And if you're new to my channel, my name is Lauren. I am the artist and quilter and fiber artist behind Garden Girl Studio. I work through tutorials, fiber art projects, stitching hangouts, and so much more. So if you're into that content, stick around. I'd love to hang out with you. And in the meantime, we're gonna figure out our stitching results. Let's dive in. Okay, we've stitched up both bookmarks. Again, the difference is that this one was pre-soaked. And when I say pre-soaked, I mean, I took a piece of felt and I soaked it in warm water before I even started stitching. This one has not been pre-soaked or anything. This one did shrink a bit when I soaked it. The reason why I soaked it in warm water is normally this water-soluble paper, which I will link in the description below, the recommendation is to soak or dissolve the paper in warm water. Now, we don't have to use warm water, and in this case, we're gonna use cold. The reason why we're using cold water is shrinkable fibers are more likely to shrink in warm water, in warm heat. So we're gonna try to see if cold water makes a difference. One of the other things that we're gonna be able to use in our testing is I've cut the exact same size strips. So the reason why I do this is because in the workshop, we wanna cover up the back of our stitching because it's gonna be prettier. So we'll use a second piece of felt for the backing, and then we're going to stitch around the edges to make it one seamless bookmark. But this is also gonna help us in our project to see, okay, this is the original size. We'll see how much it shrinks. So let's go ahead and test it out. I'm gonna soak up our bookmarks and dissolve the paper right now. Okay, this is a bowl of cold water. I mean, it's not ice water, but it is cold. We're going to go ahead and soak our water-soluble paper until it dissolves. And since it doesn't really make a difference, I'm gonna go ahead and put this one in too. We'll wait a couple minutes and we will then rinse those out. And then we're gonna let them air dry. When I pre-soaked this gray set, I let it air dry. I did not put it in a dryer, did not put it in any kind of heater. So we let it air dry on the porch and we went from there. Looks like I'm gonna have to give these a little bit of an assist. Yeah, there we go. Kind of just start breaking it up. It's coming, but it's slow. So we're gonna add, quote unquote, agitate it just a little bit. And you can see it's starting to break up now. It's probably gonna take a little bit longer, which us embroiderers, it's okay. We're patient. Slow stitching is a slow art anyway. There we go. We can see it's starting to break up now. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and agitate these and then I'm gonna let them dry and I'll show you the final results. Okay, so quick update. I just brought in, it's been about 3 hours or so, and I just, they're dry now. So I just brought them back inside the house. However, they still feel like they've got a little bit of stabilizer in them, so I think they need a little bit of a second rinse. But on the initial rinse, this set really hasn't lost any length or width. And this was the set that we pre-soaked, so I'm really loving that. This set isn't bad, but it did shrink a little bit, even with just the cold water. And you can see like the edges, so I'm gonna put them down next to each other. You can almost see like it's warped a bit, like it's kind of almost angled. It's subtle, but it's angled. So I'm gonna put them on top of each other so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. You can see like this distance is a little bit smaller than this distance. So we did lose some width. Now this is not a huge deal because theoretically, we could just trim away those edges, but yeah, I like having projects where there's no question about what's gonna happen when we're working on it. You know, I don't want those types of variables. I want to know exactly what's going to occur, so this one so far I'm happy. This was our pre-soak, and it wasn't hard to pre-soak it and just lay it flat to dry. It's one thing, like I said earlier, it's one thing if you're just gonna be freeform stitching and these will not be soaked in water. So if you're just making bookmarks and you're freeform stitching and you're not worried about guidelines or where you wanna stitch, you don't need those stick and stitch templates to do your stitching, then just working on this felt would be absolutely fine just by itself. In fact, it's beautiful felt. I love this felt. But because this is a workshop, and my attendees are learning, I really want to make sure that there's just not going to be any variables that are going to make this any more complicated for them. So I want them to be able to use a guide, you know, so they know what to stitch during the workshop. I'm going to go ahead and give this one more rinse because I can feel just a little bit of stabilizer, like especially under some of the knots and in some of the daisies. So I'm just going to rinse this under the sink one more time. We'll let it dry again, and I will give you the final results so that we can see what those look like. Okay, so we're back. I gave both of these bookmarks a second rinse just to get a little bit extra stabilizer out. So let's see how it worked out. You can see this is the bookmark that we did not pre-soak, that we did not like pre-shrink, and you can see it is smaller than its counterpart here. This was the original size of this bookmark, and you can see it is a bit warped. It kind of jets in toward the center. Overall, you can see that we did lose some space both on the sides and at the top, which isn't a huge deal as long as you're aware of that's what's going to happen if you don't pre-soak your wool felt bookmarks. Not that you have to soak them at all, but if you're using a stick and stitch project like me, then, well, soaking is inevitable because you got to get rid of the stabilizer. Now this batch, this felt is pre-soaked, and let's see on the second rinse, yeah, it's still the same size. We didn't lose any size, we didn't lose any width, it's all exactly the same, and it's looking great. And all I did was I pre-soaked this felt in a little bit of warm water. So if you're looking to work on a stick and stitch project on felt that has some amount of wool in it, you might want to consider pre-soaking it in warm water and then laying it flat to dry before you go ahead and do your stick and stitch project. So this was a fun experiment. I would say overall, I would recommend that if you are working on an embroidery project where you know you're going to need to put your wool felt or wool blended felt in water, pre-soak it if you don't want any amount of distortion or warping after you're all done rinsing and soaking it. Obviously, if you're working with wool or wool blended fabric, best not to put it in water at all. But if you're going to need to, if you're using a stick and stitch type project where you need to wash away the water soluble paper in water, then I'm going to recommend pre-soaking it because you can see I didn't lose any of the integrity, it didn't warp, and it stayed the same size, whereas the piece of felt that I did not pre-soak, it did warp a bit, and it's not a big deal. You know, if this occurs and you're running into this as a problem, you can always trim it up, square it up, Can I guarantee these results every time? No, but I think at least trying to pre-soak or do something to manage shrinkage in your projects is well worth the while. This worked for me. I can't guarantee it'll work for you, but I'd say it's definitely worth a try. Personally, like to kind of pre-plan my projects and see what's going to happen. So now that we know, that we can kind of pre-shrink the wool a little bit. And of course, it's wool, so it'll keep shrinking and keep shrinking, but this worked pretty well, and we rinsed them in cold water, so it minimized the shrinkage, kind of doing that pre-soak. So if you liked this content and you want to learn a little bit more, or if you want to see how I stitched up this project, be sure to drop a comment below. Let me know what you want to see next, and I would be more than happy to share a tutorial, a stitch along, anything you'd like to see. If you enjoyed hanging out, be sure to check one of the videos that I have linked up above here, and I would love to continue hanging out. So until next time, friends, happy stitching.